The current state of gaming is pretty confusing. On one hand, you have great releases that will be remembered and played by a lot of people, and on the other side, you have a series of disappointing releases by formerly praised studios that used to deliver exceptional games, sacrificing gameplay and user experience for revenue. Generic mechanics, lack of detail, terrible map design, buggy releases, and live services. These are some of the problems that have infested AAA gaming as of now. Fortunately though, video game reviews have helped us consumers understand whether a game is worth it or not. Or at least, that's what its original purpose was. And now you see more and more hesitation and distrust towards the so-called professional game reviewers. Some disregard them completely and prefer to read what the overall community says on platforms like Steam, Metacritic, or Reddit. But what I want to focus here is how professional video game reviews have drastically changed since their inception. What was the point that led the community to listen to influencers in social media rather than the so-called professionals? Let's take a look at the history of video game reviews and try to understand if it really is true that professional game reviewing is obsolete. And if so, how did that even happen? Now, the first traces of video game journalism can be found all the way back to 1974 by Playmeter magazine, who covered topics about music charts, music programming, technical news, but more importantly, the entire coin-operated industry that included gaming. During the latter part of the 70s, video games were a more niche and nerdy topic. Some might even argue it still is. But after the massive success of Space Invaders in 1978, video game journalism started to lift off, publishing stories, articles, and discussions around the emerging force that the gaming industry could be. Every single release was blowing the minds of consumers and seemed to achieve the impossible. And even then, not many people could have predicted the massive popularity video games were going to achieve. Let's jump forward now to 1981, where Computer and Video Games was established, becoming the first dedicated video games magazine. It covered topics such as news, game releases, rumors, technical content like programming tips through a monthly scheduling. But more importantly, some of the first fully fledged reviews that would serve as a template for future journalists and critics. Just to show you how niche games were back then, I want to take a look at one of the earliest reviews I could find from CVG, dating back to 1982 from the February release. This is a review of SpaceX, also known as Moon Cresta on the arcades. As you can see, it was a very short but detailed explanation about the game's mechanics, graphics, problems you may have, and comparison to other titles at that time, as well as giving some technical details like the memory needed and in which system to play. On the October release in 1982, CVG introduced one of the very first iterations of a scoring system used to review games. Little did they know the amount of problems giving a number to a game would bring. This scoring system was composed of 3 marks. Getting started referred to details about the game, its instructions, because, believe it or not, games not that long ago used to contain little pamphlets about the game that the player was meant to read before playing. Obviously, almost no one did, and that evolved into tutorial stages, but it also covered difficulties and whether the game was easy to understand. Value was an interesting one, since they assessed whether or not the money you were paying was worth the physical product and how it operated on the system. This means performance was a key point while reviewing the game, a concept many companies don't seem to understand now. Finally, playability is more akin to modern reviews. It was all about how original the game was. Was it fun? Could it keep attention? Basically how entertaining and replayable the game was. Reviewers will then give a score from 1 to 10 of each of these markers and then allow the readers to decide if the game was worth their money. This is a key moment, since reviews stopped being technical explanations but focused more on a buying guide concept. Reviewers and their scoring system would evolve along the years, introducing new markers and an overall score. They kinda even made reviews a bit more complicated than they should have, but they were not the only ones in the field. Other magazines kept it pretty simple, like Electronic Gaming, which had very lengthy reviews at the time, detailing not just technical aspects of the game, but also the noise from the communities around it and the impact they had on the industry. In order to showcase whether a game was really good, they had, as they called it, the Mark of Excellence, that was put on games that had a superior design, a movement started by the US National Video Game Team to highlight games that deserved special attention. By 1996, the review format changed for the better for ZVG, and this served as a great template that future reviewers would use later down the road. The main improvement was their scoring system. No longer they were stacking category after category and honestly making it a bit confusing, but now it was a very simple 1 to 5 score where 1 was a very poor game and 5 was an excellent game. Besides the rating, you can see that they started to incorporate more extended and critical reviews, keeping up with the concept that the review should serve as a buying guide. The review format changed a bit from writer to writer for CVG, but the structure was quite similar. The review of Banjo-Kazooie for the Nintendo 64, which by the way, the OG vibes I got from reading this were insane. Huge props to the design team for putting such an artistic and colorful review back then. Going back to topic though, the review contains elements we are all used to seeing in a modern review. Summary of the story, interesting characters you might encounter, platform, the number of players, the publisher, tips when playing the game, explaining core mechanics. A very important new addition was the writer's opinion, remember this one, and the rating. Now I've shown you the positive reviews, but what about the bad ones? What was a bad game back then? Well...
Hello. Hello. Brilliant! Nice to see you. If you wanna be my lover.
The Spice Girls game that came out to the PlayStation is an example of a terrible game that was reviewed at the time. Now, back then you would have the occasional disaster of a game that was more like a promo material for some big mainstream IP rather than the actual game, and this was clearly one of those cases. What I want to highlight here is that whenever a game was bad, they just straight out told you. They gave you pretty simple and clear reasons why the game was not worth it, no matter the potential or good intentions the developer may have. This is very important to understand because even though game publishers gave early access to reviewers and sponsored certain sections of a magazine at times, reviewers, not all of them, had very high standards and were proud of their work. Concurrently, other magazines were using their own format for reviewing, some easier to read than others, but the concept of providing an in-depth explanation, opinion, and rating to a video game helped many consumers decide whether or not a game was worth their money. But not many of the print-based media companies were prepared to face its biggest challenger, and later on an ally: the internet. You see, back in the 90s, web development was still in its early stages, with HTML just being invented in 1993 by Tim Berners-Lee. HTML is a standard code used to develop websites that still remains as a core foundation for modern web development. HTML allowed developers to finally have a standard way of coding a website, while having a structure that other developers could easily understand. This means that a lot of companies were able to have their own website and publish their content to the entire world. Welcome then to 1996, where N64.com was launched alongside other 4 media websites that were fully dedicated to video game journalism. As the name suggests, N64.com covered everything to do with the Nintendo 64, which was a big deal during those times. Your friendly neighbor Nintendo had other plans though, and demanded a rebrand of the site. Yes, Nintendo being Nintendo dates all the way back, which ended up merging with the other 4 sites to form what you now know as IGN. Through a snapshot provided by Wayback Machine, we can see the main appeal IGN had at the time, and somewhat still applies today, was providing gaming news, reviews, and more content on a daily basis with an in-depth analysis, as well as creating forums and FAQs that allowed people to build gaming communities that at the time wasn't as common. No longer people needed to wait a month or a week to get the latest news from gaming. No longer was little Timmy that played video games the entire day had no friends alone. Now he was able to reach out to little Bobby that played video games the entire day had no friends to talk about games. Let's compare both IGN's and CVG's Mario Party review done in 1999. We're going to focus on the content of the review rather than the visual design, since UX and UI were not even a thing. A couple of points stand out. IGN has a more serious and professional tone rather than the more enthusiastic and fun mood CVG uses. They were both good reviews, just written differently. A big difference though is the release date of these reviews. Mario Party was released on the 8th of February of 1999 in NA. IGN published its review the 11th of February of 1999, while CVG published their review until the May issue of the same year. Keep in mind though that CVG was established in Great Britain and the game released on the 9th of March of the same year. It basically took 3 days for IGN to release their review, while CVG took almost 2 months. This fact alone was a massive difference and ultimately one of the reasons for the downfall of print-based media. Both sources of media covered gameplay in a very detailed way, but CVG and other magazines usually provided additional helpful tips and interesting locations you might find during your sessions, while on IGN they were not really present. This can be argued as a positive for spoiler's sake, but it's a noticeable difference nonetheless. For whatever reason, IGN's scoring system resembled the one CVG originally used, establishing 5 different categories and independently grading them as well as providing an overall score. Most noticeably though is the inclusion of sound as a category. During the 90s, soundtracks started to have a bigger impact in games, and in some occasions, they ascended into iconic and timeless pieces. Advances in technology allowed games to have bigger and more complex audio files that professional musicians could work with and use to their full potential. One last difference is that by the 90s, reviewers became more critical in the sense that they weren't as easily surprised at a game as in the 80s, where a lot of video games coming out were full of hype, either by the community or because they were introducing features never seen before. With the rapid evolution of the internet and web development as well as the decline in sales of print-based media, many of the video game journalistic companies moved to the online space, providing a very similar content format to the one displayed on IGN's site. And still to this day, online review consumption is the main way consumers can assess whether a game is worth their money or not. But before jumping into the current review format of big gaming news companies, we have to address a new way of reviewing games that totally changed the landscape on how a game could be reviewed. Welcome to the streaming era. With the rise of YouTube back in 2005, creating the first major video sharing platform through a simple interface that could work through any standard web browser, it opened a door for people from different backgrounds, interests and ideas to express them creatively through a video on the platform. It is conflicting finding the first online video game reviewer, but some of the most notable have to be James Rolfe and his character of Angry Video Game Nerd. Posting his first video on the 8th of April of 2006, introducing a totally different type of review where the tone was way less formal, detailed and critical than your typical review, but the selling point here was the entertainment value that not many reviewers had since the decline of magazine reviews. His take was more of a rant about how bad the game Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde was, even providing some small footage of it, which at the time was a big deal. His video was a very honest, sympathetic, and funny take on video game reviews. But again, the takeaway here is that video game reviews could not just function as a buying guide, but entertaining content. And similar to James, you have other creators that built their own legacy with their own ideas like Angry Joe Show or Lazy Game Reviews. And with the rise of content creators and their unique ways of covering a game, the community was shifting towards these creators for their personalities, relatability, insight or entertainment value that was lacking on IGN's written reviews. By this time, CVG's was on the decline and it never really got back up. So it was basically IGN's controlling the entire reviewing system for a while. And with this comes the main question of the video. What makes a professional video game reviewer? And while researching online, we can sum it up this way. A professional game critic will usually have a degree. It could be anything from communications to journalism or even history. Reviewers have to be good at putting their ideas, thoughts, experience, and opinions in a feasible, fast, and entertaining way. Diversity of video games is a must, since they need a deep understanding of video game genres, styles, mechanics, their history, the community around it, and current standards. And finally, they need a vast portfolio of reviews that showcases their skills, passion, and talents. This last point is key since reviewers need a lot of consistency. How many of us have seen a review from Steam or Metacritic from a random user that's very detailed, passionate, and with more knowledge than your average professional reviewer? But the odds are that that user won't be posting a review with that level every 3 days or a week, but was rather passionate for that specific game. Let's take it full circle then, and compare IGN's latest Mario Party review back in 2021 against CVG's magazine and IGN's first Mario Party. The first point to notice is how fast reviews are now. This Mario Superstars review was posted a day before the game's release. It's definitely harder to read a modern review now since there are no real sections or categories, but rather chapters that makes a couple of points in between. For example, if I wanted to read about minigames, CVG did a fantastic job on making it easy to find, where in IGN's modern review, it kinda covers it in most parts of the entire review. The most fundamental change in reviews now is that the writers mix their opinions and experience with the game mechanics and features, and you can decide whether that is a good thing or not. But reviews definitely take longer now to read than before since there's a lot of setup the writers put before explaining the game. You might call it stalling, others might appreciate it, and that will be up for debate. And of course we can nitpick a very bad and controversial modern review to dramatize this video, but after reading over 40 reviews, not just from IGN but Kotaku and Metacritic, I found a couple of takeaways. Egos are definitely a thing, and critics take too much time to get to the point of the review. Some are way more blatant than others. Reviewers have a huge pressure of posting their review as soon as possible, with sometimes very tight schedules that definitely impact their overall enjoyment. And I mean, who likes to rush through a game? Since gaming back in the 80s and 90s was still somewhat niche, a lot of the content was very relatable, genuine, and you can read the passion behind the old school reviews. But now, since it's a business that needs to be pumping out content so fast, and specifically to mainstream audiences, modern reviews are just bland, uninspired, and rushed. In my opinion, the best way to dictate whether a game is worth money or not is through multiple reviews if you have the time, or your favorite personality online if you're seeking some entertainment along the way. I think people throw way too much hate at reviewers, yet not all of it is unjustified, since there have been a lot of instances of clear biases, lazy and outright stupid reviews by professionals. I definitely prefer old school reviews that were straight to the point and told you interesting tips or gimmicks, as well as considering performance as a key aspect of a game, since that's a missing marker modern reviews have unless a game really struggles with performance. So what do you think? Are professional game reviews really that bad? Do you even read them or watch them anymore? I would like to know how you decide if a game is worth it or not in the comments down below. Thanks for watching.